In years gone by, Napoli's footballing icons have all had a certain quality about them. A dazzling touch of flair, a rhythmic fluidity in their dribbling, an eye for the spectacular. It's the stuff that dreams are made of and that kids have attempted to emulate in the parks and playgrounds across Naples since. So why is it that a box-crashing 6'4" Scottish international has become their most recent hero? You're about to find out. I'm Matt from FourFourTwo and this is how Scott McTominay became Napoli's best player. So let's back up ever so slightly to last summer, where McTominay leaves the Premier League for Serie A after 22 years involved with Manchester United. He'd just been a part of their FA Cup winning side, but a spot in 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗥𝗔 plans moving forward wasn't guaranteed. So when Antonio Conte finally convinced his bosses to splash €30 million on McTominay, it seemed like a good idea at the time for Man United, especially considering he was a homegrown talent, and therefore the profit made from his sale was all posted positively against the club's financial records for that year. As much as McTominay had come off the back of his best season in front of goal, including some stellar performances against Chelsea and Liverpool in the FA Cup, he seemed to be wasted when playing in a deeper role as one of the two midfielders, as he was far too far away from the goal-scoring action, nor was he going to replace Bruno Fernandes as the number 10 or focal point, let's say, in the attack. There's plenty of things McTominay could do, as I'll dive deeper into during this video, but saying he's a better choice than Bruno is just not one of them. It seemed to me that anything McTominay did was always put into the sort of there when you need him, tries his best, cut him some slack, homegrown hero category, but was never the big name, first on the team sheet sort of player that you'd expect Man United to buy in the transfer window. Like if Ten Hag or any manager came out and said, we don't need to sign a new £70 million midfielder, we have McTominay, there would have been absolute riots among the fan base. Sort of like when Jack Walker said Blackburn Rovers don't need Zidane in the 90s because they had Tim Sherwood, and I'm still talking about that 30 years later. Despite this though, Ten Hag actually did say he wasn't pleased with the sale of McTominay, stating that these were the rules the club had to deal with, obviously referencing the financial fair play rules that I mentioned earlier. I mean, you could argue that plenty of players didn't fulfill their potential under Ten Hag. Probably one of the reasons why the Dutchman got sacked, but that could be a whole other video. The question is, would McTominay still have done well under Ruben Amorim? Well, I'm not totally convinced. I think the build-up play is still too slow and the emphasis on getting it to the wide players and using overlapping wing-backs doesn't suit McTominay's end-to-end style. But whose style of play does it suit? That's right, counter-attacking extraordinaire Antonio Conte. Now I know you're going to be saying, Matt, hold on, Antonio Conte is also well known for his use of wing-backs for a 3-5-2 formation, for utilising triangles out wide and direct pacey counter-attacks. But this year at Napoli things have changed ever so slightly and it may be due to their new Scottish powerhouse. The Napoli boss has often switched things up in play this season, with his 3-5-2 system reverting to a back four when in possession in what resembles a 4-3-3, with McTominay playing as the furthest midfielder forward, closest to Lukaku. As the fullbacks are in a 4, not a back 5, they get forward in support but don't attack the box as much, knowing they have left 2 defenders behind instead of 3. Because of this, they hold the width, create triangles with a centre-back and deep-lying midfielder and allow the wingers to move centrally. Here they join McTominay and another midfielder, whichever one hasn't dropped deep to pick up the ball, to form a central attacking unit that, when anything is held up by Romelu Lukaku, joins the attack or runs in behind the opposition defence, as long as the ball is direct and the movement is sharp. And I know we're talking mainly about McTominay in this video, but I think we've got to give a shout out to Romelu Lukaku as well, another player often maligned in the Premier League. You could argue this is classic Lukaku under Conte. I mean, we saw him under the Italian post a brilliant 24 league goal and 9 assist season as Inter romped to the Serie A title in 2021. But don't forget, between that, there's been a poor spell at Chelsea and in different seasons, let's say, back at Inter and then at Roma since then. This seems to be a feature of Lukaku's career. No matter how much he gets knocked down, ridiculed or memed all over the internet, he still finds a way to pick things back up and deliver when trusted, and we've seen it this season. Into double figures for both goals and assists, it's no surprise that the others around him, like McTominay and 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗥𝗔 from central midfield, are having good seasons in front of goal. In my eyes, it's equal credit, the players on the pitch and the tactical tweaks from the genius off of it. So what's the result of this tactical tweak? Well, McTominay is now showing off all of his attacking prowess. He's had more shots on target than anyone else in the squad, and his goal scoring tally is right up there with striker Romelu Lukaku. In fact, Scott McTominay now holds the record for the most most goals scored in Serie A by a Scotsman, and he's hit double figures for the first time in his career. But goals aside, he has not neglected the other side of the game either. I mentioned McTominay playing in the most attacking of a midfield three, but his defensive stats show that he's putting his foot in too, with just as many tackles as fellow midfielder Frank Anguissa, more interceptions than other midfielder 𝗕𝗫𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗧𝗏𝗏, and way more duels attempted than one than both of those two. In fact, it was pretty obvious from the off that McTominay was adapting well to a new league, in a way that would suggest it wasn't really that big of a deal to move abroad in the first place. Early wins versus Palermo, Monza and Como were heavily influenced by McTominay's performances, and it was actually around this point where Conte started to ever so slightly tweak his tactics, signs that the Italian was rather fond of his new midfielder. We all know what Conte's like. He has his favourites, and for good reason, because they carry out exactly what he wants on the pitch. And it's this willingness to carry out instructions that has placed McTominay firmly in the Italians' good books. It's become a real habit of Conte, taking the unsung hero or the undervalued player at a club to refine their career and create a whole new monster. For reference, check out 𝗘𝗫𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏𝗧 circa 2017. Unbelievable. Anyway, halfway through the season, Napoli are looking pretty good. They are definitely in the title race, and given Conte's experience in these situations, you'd be actually a foolish person to not back Napoli to go ahead and make the rest of the season a successful one. But into the back end of the campaign was where Napoli and their fans really saw a huge return on investment from their new number 8. 5 goals in 3 straight victories over Monza, Empoli and Torino moved the club into pole position and gave cause for McTominay to be in the conversation amongst the best players in the whole league. He's definitely up there with the best signings. In this day and age, a match-winning midfielder who does everything for just £27.5 million is an absolute steal. Like I mentioned earlier, McTominay doesn't necessarily fit the bill of someone who writes themselves into Napoli folklore, but maybe that's part of it. Maybe the uniqueness of McTominay and his style of play, combined with his abundance of passion and effort, actually make him ready-made for a club who themselves sit in the underdog world of Italian football, with the us versus everyone else mindset. Sure, he's the complete opposite of Diego Maradona. He won't score as many as Marek Hamšík, he won't play like 𝗕𝗫𝗏𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗏, nor bring the stadium to its feet like 𝗘𝗫𝗏𝗧𝗏𝗏𝗏. But who cares? He's the driving force in Napoli's success, and that's clearly good enough for them. Besides, it's not completely out of this world to think that he could succeed away from the Premier League. He's hardly the first Brit to go and find some success abroad in recent seasons. Jude Bellingham's an obvious one at Dortmund and Real Madrid. Bayern's Harry Kane finding the net in any league comes as a shock to absolutely nobody. And Conor Gallagher has made a decent go of things at Atletico Madrid. But in Serie A especially, there's been somewhat of a successful influx of players that for some reason really suit the style of football in the league. Alongside McTominay, you've got his international teammate Billy Gilmour, who's done okay, although he looks underwhelming compared to what McTominay's done. You've got the Scot Lewis Ferguson, who has just captained Bologna to their first Coppa Italia final in over 50 years. And in the last few seasons, you could argue that Chris Smalling and Fikayo Tomori have played their career's best football on Italian shores. So was it a mistake for Man United to sell McTominay, or are we just looking back at this with a pinch of hindsight? Maybe he was always suited to Napoli anyway. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Hit the subscribe button for loads more 442 content, and I'll see you in the next video.